The champagne glass trembled in my hand when my sister Natasha cleared her throat at the Christmas dinner table and said, "Well, since we're all sharing our wonderful holiday news, maybe Delilah can tell us about her exciting career in, what is it again? Customer service?" The way she emphasized those last two words, dripping with the same condescension she'd perfected since we were teenagers, told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation was going to unfold. I should have seen it coming the moment she walked into our parents' dining room in Millbrook Heights wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but sitting there watching her smirk while our entire extended family waited for my response, I knew this Christmas dinner was about to become a battlefield. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Delilah Reeves, and for the past 18 months, I'd been working at Pinnacle Dynamics, a mid-sized tech consulting firm in downtown Riverside. To everyone at this table, my parents Robert and Linda, my sister Natasha, her investment banker husband Trevor, and our various aunts, uncles, and cousins. My job was exactly what Natasha had just described, a dead-end customer service position that barely paid the bills. What they didn't know, what none of them could have possibly imagined, was that in exactly 6 days, I would be standing in the executive boardroom of that same company while CEO Jonathan Whitmore announced my promotion to the board of directors, making me the youngest board member in Pinnacle Dynamics' 15-year history. But as I sat there watching Natasha's perfectly manicured fingers gesture dismissively in my direction, while she launched into what I already knew would be a systematic dismantling of my life choices, all of that felt like a distant dream. I mean, don't get me wrong, Natasha continued, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted to sound supportive while actually being cruel. Everyone has to start somewhere, right? It's just that most people don't stay in entry-level positions for quite so long. She paused to take a sip of wine, letting her words sink in while our cousin Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and our Aunt Patricia tried to change the subject by asking about dessert. The thing about family dynamics is that they have a way of freezing you in amber, preserving the version of yourself that existed when you were 12 years old and awkward and still figuring out who you wanted to become. In Natasha's mind, and honestly in the minds of most people sitting around this table, I was still that quiet, unremarkable middle child who never quite measured up to her older sister's achievements. Natasha had graduated summa cum laude from Westfield University, landed a high-paying job at Morrison & Associates law firm straight out of school, and married Trevor, whose family owned half the commercial real estate in the tri-state area. She drove a BMW, lived in a penthouse apartment in the prestigious Thornfield district, and had never met a designer handbag she couldn't afford. Meanwhile, I drove a 7-year-old Honda Civic, lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in the Oakwood neighborhood, and shopped at discount stores. From the outside, it looked like Natasha had won the sister lottery while I was still trying to figure out how to play the game. Delilah's always been more of a behind-the-scenes type, my mother said, clearly trying to be helpful but somehow making it worse. She's very good with people, very reliable. Not everyone needs to be in the spotlight. Trevor nodded sagely, as if my mother had just shared some profound wisdom about my inherent limitations. Absolutely. The world needs all types. Customer service is actually incredibly important. Companies couldn't function without people willing to handle the day-to-day operations. The condescension was so thick I could have cut it with a butter knife. Here was Trevor, who had never worked a day in customer service in his life, explaining to me why my job was valuable in the same tone you might use to praise a child for coloring inside the lines. "What exactly do you do there?" asked my Uncle Frank, genuinely curious but somehow making it sound like he was asking about an exotic disease. At the tech place, I mean. This was always the moment I dreaded. How do you explain that your official job title is Client Relations Specialist, without sounding like you're trying to dress up something simple? How do you describe the complexity of what you actually do when everyone has already decided that your work is insignificant? "I handle client communications and project coordination," I said carefully, which was technically true but laughably incomplete. What I didn't mention was that those client communications involved managing relationships with Fortune 500 companies whose contracts were worth millions of dollars. What I didn't say was that my project coordination meant overseeing the implementation of AI systems that would revolutionize how these companies operated. What I couldn't explain without sounding defensive was that Jonathan Whitmore had personally chosen me for a confidential initiative that would position Pinnacle Dynamics as the leading AI consulting firm on the West Coast. "That sounds nice," Natasha said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Very administrative. I'm sure it's perfect for someone who likes routine and doesn't want too much pressure." The room fell into that particular kind of silence that happens when someone says something so cutting that everyone knows it was meant to hurt, but no one wants to acknowledge it directly. My cousin Bradley studied his mashed potatoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. Aunt Patricia suddenly became very interested in refilling everyone's water glasses. Even Trevor looked uncomfortable, though whether that was because of his wife's cruelty or because he agreed with her assessment, I couldn't tell. What Natasha didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 3 weeks earlier, I had been sitting in a conference room with Jonathan Whitmore and the head of HR, signing confidentiality agreements and discussing the details of my upcoming promotion. What they couldn't see was the email sitting in my inbox, marked Confidential, Board Announcement January 3rd, outlining exactly how my new role would be revealed to the company and the industry at large. But as I sat there listening to my sister systematically destroy my credibility in front of our entire family, all of that felt surreal, like a story that was happening to someone else. In this moment, in this room, I was just Delilah, who couldn't quite measure up, Delilah who had somehow failed to launch despite being 28 years old, with a master's degree and a work ethic that had impressed every boss I'd ever had. "Well," I said finally, setting down my fork and looking directly at Natasha, "I guess we'll see how things develop." It wasn't much of a response, but it was all I could manage without revealing the secret that would change everything. In 6 days, every person at this table would know exactly what I did for a living, and exactly how wrong they had been about my so-called dead-end job. But first I had to survive the rest of this Christmas dinner. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The moment that changed everything happened during dessert, when my father decided to make his annual Family Achievements speech. Dad had been doing this tradition for as long as I could remember, standing up with his coffee cup raised, going around the table to highlight everyone's accomplishments from the past year. It was supposed to be heartwarming, but it always felt more like a performance review where some family members consistently received glowing evaluations while others got polite participation trophies. "This has been such an incredible year for our family," Dad began, his voice taking on that formal tone he used during his real estate presentations. "We have so much to be proud of, so many successes to celebrate." I already knew how this would go. Natasha would get praised for her promotion to senior associate at Morrison & Associates, and for the high-profile merger case she'd helped win. Trevor would be commended for his real estate development project that had been featured in Riverside Business Weekly. My cousin Bradley would be acknowledged for completing his MBA. Even our youngest cousin Emma, who was only 16, would get recognition for making varsity soccer. And then there would be me. "Natasha," Dad continued, beaming at his eldest daughter, "your mother and I are so proud of what you've accomplished this year. Senior associate at 29? That's extraordinary. And Trevor, congratulations again on the Riverside Harbor development. I saw the article in the paper, Transforming the Waterfront for a New Generation. Incredible work." Natasha practically glowed under the praise, her hand finding Trevor's as she smiled that radiant smile that had been winning her admirers since high school. "Thank you, Daddy." It's been an amazing year. The partnership track at Morrison is really opening up some incredible opportunities. And the Harbor project is just phase 1. Trevor added, clearly enjoying his moment in the spotlight. Phase 2 will include luxury condominiums and a boutique shopping district. We're talking about a complete transformation of the downtown waterfront. The table erupted in congratulations and excited questions about the project. I watched my family lean in, genuinely interested and impressed, and felt that familiar pang of invisibility that had defined most of my childhood. This was how it always worked. Natasha's successes became the center of attention, while my own achievements barely registered as footnotes. Dad continued around the table, acknowledging Bradley's MBA, Emma's athletic achievements, and even our Uncle Frank's successful knee replacement surgery. Each person got their moment of recognition, their chance to bask in the family's approval and admiration. Finally, inevitably, Dad's attention turned to me. "And of course, we're proud of Delilah too," he said, his voice taking on a slightly different quality. Warmer, maybe, but also more careful, like he was navigating delicate territory. "She's been working so hard at her job, really dedicated to her career in customer service." The pause before customer service was barely perceptible, but I caught it. So did everyone else at the table. It was the same pause people used when they were trying to find something positive to say about a situation they didn't quite understand or approve of. "What exactly do you do there again, sweetheart?" Mom asked, clearly trying to give me an opportunity to explain myself, to maybe elevate my position in the family's estimation. Before I could answer, Natasha jumped in with that helpful older sister voice that had always driven me crazy. "She handles customer complaints and coordinates projects. It's very important work. Every company needs people who can manage the day-to-day operations while the executives focus on strategy and growth." The way she said it made it sound like I was some kind of essential but ultimately replaceable cog in a machine, someone who kept the lights on while the real decision-makers shaped the future. Which, to be fair, was exactly how my family had always seen me. "That's wonderful, dear," Aunt Patricia said with the kind of enthusiastic overcorrection that made it clear she thought my job was anything but wonderful. "Customer service is so important. People don't appreciate how challenging it can be to deal with difficult customers all day." "Absolutely," Uncle Frank agreed. "Takes patience. Real patience. Not everyone could do it." They were trying to be supportive, but their words felt like consolation prizes. Here was my family, gathered around this beautifully set table in my parents' elegant dining room, trying to find ways to make my little job sound meaningful, while simultaneously making it clear that they saw it as fundamentally different from, and lesser than, the real careers that Natasha and Trevor had built. "The thing is," Natasha said, warming to her theme, "Delilah's always been more comfortable in support roles. Even in school, she was never one to seek out leadership positions or put herself forward for recognition. She's always preferred to work behind the scenes, helping other people succeed." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were intentionally cruel, but because they revealed exactly how my own sister saw me. In her mind, I wasn't someone who was capable of leadership or deserving of recognition. I was a helper, a supporter, someone whose primary value lay in making other people's achievements possible. "There's nothing wrong with that," Trevor added, clearly trying to soften his wife's assessment. "The world needs followers as much as it needs leaders. Not everyone can be in charge. Not everyone can be in charge." The phrase echoed in my head as I looked around the table at my family. These people who had known me my entire life, who had watched me graduate summa cum laude from Riverside University with a degree in computer science, who had celebrated when I got my master's in artificial intelligence from tech powerhouse Westfield Institute, who had supposedly supported me when I chose to pursue a career in technology instead of following a more traditional path. And yet here they were, reducing my entire professional life to customer service and support roles, completely oblivious to the fact that in less than a week, I would be announced as the youngest board member in the history of a company that was about to become one of the most influential AI consulting firms in the country. "Well," I said carefully, my voice steadier than I felt, "I suppose we'll see what the new year brings." Dad raised his coffee cup. "Here's to another year of success for all of us, and to supporting each other no matter what paths we choose." Everyone raised their cups and toasted, but I could see the subtle exchanges of glances, the small smiles that said what everyone was thinking. Poor Delilah, still trying to convince herself that her little job mattered, still hoping that someday she might achieve something worth celebrating. As we clinked glasses and the conversation moved on to other topics, I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Jonathan Whitmore. Any chance we could move the announcement up? I have a family situation that could benefit from some clarity. His response came back within minutes. "Consider it done. Board meeting moved to December 30th. Announcement goes public January 2nd. Hope everything's okay." I typed back, "Everything's about to be perfect." None of them had any idea what was coming. The drive home from my parents' house felt like the longest 43 minutes of my life. I kept replaying the dinner conversation in my head, each dismissive comment hitting me with fresh impact now that I was alone in my car with nothing but the quiet hum of the highway and my own thoughts for company. The words "not everyone can be in charge" kept echoing in my brain like a broken record, and every time I remembered the way Trevor had said it, with such casual certainty, as if he was sharing an obvious truth about my fundamental limitations, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. By the time I pulled into the parking garage of my apartment building in Oakwood, I was oscillating between fury and something that felt uncomfortably close to self-doubt. Was I overreacting? Was this just normal family dynamics, the kind of sibling rivalry and generational misunderstanding that happened in every family? Or was what had happened tonight actually as insulting and demeaning as it felt? I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, my heels clicking against the concrete steps in a rhythm that matched my agitated heartbeat. The familiar side of my front door, painted forest green with the brass number 47 that I'd polished myself when I moved in, usually felt welcoming. But tonight it just reminded me of everything my family saw when they looked at my life. A modest 1-bedroom apartment in a decent but unremarkable neighborhood. A Honda Civic instead of a BMW. A lifestyle that screamed making do rather than making it. Inside, I kicked off my heels and immediately went to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of wine. The bottle was a mid-range Pinot Noir that I'd bought at the grocery store, not the expensive vintage that Natasha and Trevor had brought to dinner tonight. Another small reminder of the gap between my world and theirs. I took a large sip and leaned against my kitchen counter, finally allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. The thing that bothered me most wasn't even the condescension, though that had been hard enough to swallow. It was the absolute certainty with which my family had dismissed my potential. When Natasha talked about me being more comfortable in support roles, she wasn't being malicious. She genuinely believed it. When Trevor explained that, quote, "not everyone can be in charge," he was stating what he saw as an obvious fact about my character and capabilities. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were trying to help me accept what they saw as my natural limitations. That's what made it so much worse. I walked over to my living room window and looked out at the city lights spread below. From here, I could see the downtown skyline, including the gleaming glass tower that housed Pinnacle Dynamics. Somewhere in that building was Jonathan Whitmore's office, where just 3 weeks ago he had looked me in the eye and told me that I was exactly the kind of innovative thinker the company needed on its board. "You see connections that other people miss," he had said. "You understand both the technical possibilities and the human implications of what we're building. That's rare, Delilah. That's valuable." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my work emails, looking for that message thread where Jonathan had first approached me about the board position. Finding it, I read through our exchange again, trying to ground myself in reality instead of getting lost in my family's perception of who I was. "Delilah," the first email read, "I've been watching your work on the Meridian Industries project, and I'm impressed by how you've managed to navigate both the technical challenges and the client relationship complexities. Your insights during the AI implementation have been invaluable. I'd like to discuss some opportunities that might interest you." That had led to a series of private meetings where Jonathan had gradually revealed his vision for Pinnacle Dynamics' future and my potential role in it. The company was positioned to become a major player in the AI consulting space, but they needed board members who understood the technology at a granular level while also grasping the broader business implications. He had been watching me for months, he explained, impressed by how I had managed to build trust with skeptical clients while implementing cutting-edge AI solutions that transformed their operations. "Most people can do one or the other," he had said during our final meeting. "They can either manage the technical side or handle the relationship side. You do both seamlessly. That's why I want you on this board." I set my phone down and walked to my home office, a small second bedroom that I had converted into a workspace. The walls were covered with whiteboards where I had mapped out AI implementation strategies, and my desk was stacked with technical journals and industry reports. This was where I did my real work. The strategic thinking and problem-solving that my family couldn't see because it didn't fit their narrow definition of what constituted a real career. On my bookshelf were copies of the 3 papers I had published in academic journals over the past 2 years, research that had contributed to Pinnacle Dynamics' reputation as an industry leader. Next to them were the client testimonials that had accumulated in my personnel file, letters from CEOs and CTOs praising my ability to translate complex technical concepts into actionable business strategies. But none of that mattered to my family because they couldn't see it. All they saw was that I didn't have a corner office, or a fancy title, or a six-figure salary that they could brag about at cocktail parties. They saw customer service calls and project coordination, missing entirely the fact that those customer service calls were actually strategic consulting sessions with Fortune 500 executives, and that project coordination meant overseeing the implementation of AI systems that would save companies millions of dollars. The worst part was that I had been complicit in their misunderstanding. For months, I had been deliberately vague about my work because of the confidentiality agreements I had signed. When they asked what I did, I gave them simplified answers that wouldn't violate any NDAs but also didn't convey the true scope of my responsibilities. I had been protecting Pinnacle Dynamics' competitive advantages, but in the process I had allowed my own family to develop a completely inaccurate picture of my professional life. My phone buzzed with a text message from my best friend Zara, who had been my roommate in graduate school and was now working as a senior software engineer at a tech startup in Silicon Valley. "How was Christmas dinner?" she asked. "Did you tell them about the board position yet?" I typed back, still under NDA until January 2nd. But it was illuminating. Her response came back immediately. "Uh-oh. What happened?" I found myself typing out the entire story, the achievements speech, Natasha's comments about support roles, Trevor's observation about leadership, the way my parents had praised everyone else's career milestones while treating mine like a participation trophy. As I wrote it all out, the injustice of it became even clearer. "Holy crap," Zara replied when I finished. "Please tell me you're planning some kind of epic reveal." "I moved up the timeline," I wrote back. "Board meeting is December 30th now. Public announcement January 2nd. Yes, I am here for this. Your family is about to get the shock of their lives." "Part of me feels bad about it," I admitted. "Like maybe I should just let it go and prove myself over time instead of making a big dramatic statement." "Delilah," came her reply, "you have been proving yourself for years. You have advanced degrees, published research, and you're about to become the youngest board member at a major consulting firm. The problem isn't that you haven't proven yourself. The problem is that they refuse to see who you actually are. Sometimes people need a wake-up call." She was right, and I knew it. This wasn't about revenge or showing off. This was about forcing my family to confront the gap between their assumptions and reality. For too long, I had accepted their limited view of my potential, even when I knew it was wrong. I had let them treat me like the family underachiever because it was easier than challenging their preconceptions. But tonight had changed something fundamental. Sitting in that dining room, listening to my sister explain why I was naturally suited for support roles, watching my family nod along as if she was sharing some profound insight about my character that had crystallized something for me. I was done accepting their diminished expectations. I was done allowing them to define my worth based on their inability to understand what I actually did for a living. In 6 days, everything would change. In 6 days, they would learn exactly who Delilah Reeves really was and what she was capable of achieving. The question was whether they would be able to handle the truth when they finally saw it. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The emotional turbulence from Christmas dinner had settled into something much more focused: determination. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, and began crafting an email that would change everything. "Jonathan," I typed, "I've given considerable thought to our conversation about timing and public relations strategy for the board announcement. I believe there may be significant value in accelerating our timeline and making a bigger splash than we initially planned." I paused, considering how much to reveal about my personal motivations without sounding unprofessional. Jonathan Whitmore was a brilliant CEO, but he was also someone who understood the importance of narrative and timing in business. If I framed this correctly, he would see the strategic value in what I was proposing. "The current industry landscape presents a unique opportunity," I continued. "Meridian Industries just announced their Q4 results yesterday, and the 23% efficiency gains they achieved through our AI implementation are already generating buzz in the trade publications. Tech Vision Weekly is running a feature story on AI consulting firms next week, and Digital Innovation Quarterly is doing their annual Rising Stars in Tech issue in early January. This was all true, though I was definitely emphasizing the business case more than my personal desire to shock my family into recognizing my actual worth. The beauty was that both motivations could coexist. What was good for my ego was also good for Pinnacle Dynamics. I propose we coordinate the board announcement with a strategic media push, I wrote. If we time it right, we could position Pinnacle Dynamics as the clear industry leader while showcasing our innovative approach to leadership development. The fact that you're promoting someone who started in client relations to the board demonstrates our commitment to recognizing talent regardless of traditional hierarchies. I was getting excited as I typed, realizing that this really could be a win-win situation. Jonathan had always been interested in Pinnacle Dynamics' public profile, and this kind of story, young woman rises through the ranks to become youngest board member, would generate exactly the kind of positive attention that could translate into new business. What if we planned a small reception for January 2nd, I suggested. Nothing too elaborate, but enough to make sure the announcement gets proper coverage. I have some ideas about how to make this newsworthy beyond just the promotion itself. I sent the email and immediately started researching. If I was going to do this, I wanted to do it right. I pulled up the websites for Tech Vision Weekly and Digital Innovation Quarterly, noting their submission deadlines and editorial calendars. I researched recent board appointments at other consulting firms, looking for angles that would make my story stand out. My phone rang while I was deep in research mode. Jonathan's name flashed on the screen. "Delilah," he said without preamble, "I just read your email. This is brilliant." "You think so?" I tried to keep the excitement out of my voice, but I was practically vibrating with energy. "Absolutely. I've been looking for ways to raise our profile, and this hits all the right notes. Young, diverse leadership. Innovation in hiring practices. The Meridian success story as proof of concept. It's perfect." I could hear him thinking through the logistics even as we spoke. "What did you have in mind for the reception?" "Something at the Riverside Grand Hotel," I said, the plan forming as I spoke. "Their crystal ballroom has great natural light for photos, and it's upscale enough to attract the right crowd without being ostentatious. We could invite our major clients, some local business leaders, maybe a few tech journalists." "I love it. What about your family? Will they be there?" The question caught me off guard, but only for a moment. "I think that could be arranged," I said carefully. "It would certainly add a personal dimension to the story." "Perfect. Send me a detailed proposal by end of day, and let's make this happen." After we hung up, I sat back in my chair and realized what I had just set in motion. In 10 days, I would be standing in the crystal ballroom of the Riverside Grand Hotel, being introduced as the newest board member of Pinnacle Dynamics, while my parents, Natasha and Trevor, watched from the audience. The image was so satisfying I almost laughed out loud. But first, I had work to do, real work. I spent the rest of the morning creating a comprehensive proposal for the announcement event. I reached out to my contacts at various trade publications, gauging their interest in covering the story. I researched catering options, photographer availability, and venue logistics. By lunchtime, I had a 15-page document outlining every aspect of what would essentially be my own professional coming-out party. The most delicate part was figuring out how to invite my family without revealing what the event was actually for. I needed them there. But the surprise element was crucial to the impact I wanted to create. After several drafts, I settled on something appropriately vague. "Hi everyone," I wrote in a group text to my family. "I know this is short notice, but my company is hosting a reception on January 2nd to celebrate some recent successes, and employees are encouraged to bring family members. It's at the Riverside Grand Hotel at 6 p.m., cocktails and appetizers, business casual attire. Would you be interested in coming? It would mean a lot to me to have you there." The responses came back quickly. "Dad, of course, sweetheart, we'd love to support you." "Mom, how wonderful, we'll be there." Even Natasha replied, "Sounds great." Trevor and I would love to see where you work. The irony of Natasha's response wasn't lost on me. She wanted to see where I worked, probably expecting some modest office space that would confirm her assumptions about my customer service role. Instead, she would be walking into one of the most elegant ballrooms in the city, surrounded by tech industry leaders and business journalists, watching her little sister be celebrated as a rising star in artificial intelligence consulting. I spent the afternoon reaching out to clients, many of whom were genuinely excited about attending. Dr. Sarah Chen from Meridian Industries immediately agreed to come, and even offered to speak about our collaboration if needed. The CEO of Pinnacle Partners, our largest client, confirmed his attendance and mentioned bringing several members of his executive team. By evening, I had responses from 12 major clients, 6 journalists, and half a dozen local business leaders. Jonathan was thrilled when I sent him the updated guest list. "This is turning into a much bigger event than I anticipated," he called to tell me. "The response has been incredible. I think we're going to need a larger space." "The grand ballroom is available," I said, having already checked. "It seats 200 comfortably for a cocktail reception." "Book it." "And Delilah?" "This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking that makes you perfect for the board. You've turned a simple announcement into a major networking opportunity for the entire company." That night, I called Zara to update her on the day's developments. "Wait," she said. "So you're basically throwing yourself a surprise party that your family thinks is just a casual work event? That's actually a pretty accurate summary. This is going to be epic. I'm flying out for this." There's no way I'm missing the moment when Natasha realizes her, quote, customer service sister is actually a tech industry rising star. "You don't have to." I'm already looking at flights. This is going to be the best thing ever. After we hung up, I walked back to my home office and looked at the whiteboard where I had been mapping out AI implementation strategies for the past 6 months. In 10 days, these same strategies would be presented to a room full of industry leaders as examples of the innovative thinking that had earned me a seat on Pinnacle Dynamics' board. But more than that, in 10 days, my family would finally understand who I really was. They would see past their assumptions and limitations and recognize the person I had been all along, someone capable of leadership, innovation, and success on my own terms. The decision was made. The plans were in motion. Now all I had to do was wait for January 2nd to arrive. The week between Christmas and New Year's became the most intense period of preparation I had ever experienced. What had started as a simple board announcement had evolved into something much larger, a comprehensive showcase of everything I had accomplished at Pinnacle Dynamics, and by extension, a complete refutation of every assumption my family had ever made about my capabilities. I arrived at the office on December 27th to find Jonathan had already cleared his calendar for our planning sessions. The conference room on the 32nd floor had been transformed into a war room, with whiteboards covered in timeline charts, guest lists, and media strategy notes. Rebecca Martinez, our head of marketing, was there with a stack of folders and a laptop displaying what looked like a presentation deck. "Delilah," Jonathan said as I walked in, "Rebecca has some ideas about how to position this story that I think you're going to love." Rebecca smiled and opened the first folder. "I've been researching similar announcements in the tech consulting space, and honestly, most of them are boring press releases that nobody remembers. But your story, this has all the elements of something that could get real traction." She spread out a collection of articles and reports across the conference table. "Look at these headlines from the past year. Tech giant promotes another Ivy League MBA to board. Consulting firm appoints former Goldman Sachs executive. Industry veteran joins board after 20 years in traditional roles. See the pattern?" I did see it. Every story was about someone who had followed a predictable path to success: prestigious education, traditional career progression, expected qualifications. "Now imagine this headline," Rebecca continued, pointing to a mock-up she had created. "From client calls to boardroom, how AI specialist Delilah Reeves redefined career advancement at Pinnacle Dynamics." Or this one, "Breaking the mold, tech firm promotes in-house innovation expert to youngest board member in company history." Jonathan leaned forward. "The angle writes itself. You started in client relations. But you weren't just answering phones. You were building relationships with Fortune 500 executives while simultaneously developing AI implementation strategies that saved those companies millions. You published research that influenced industry best practices. You turned what looked like an entry-level position into a launching pad for genuine innovation. I felt a surge of validation hearing my actual accomplishments laid out so clearly. This was exactly what my family had never understood, that the work I had been doing was far more complex and valuable than its job title suggested. "We need to document everything," Rebecca said, pulling out another folder. "I want to create a comprehensive portfolio that shows your progression from day one. Client testimonials, project outcomes, published papers, industry recognition, the whole story." Over the next 3 hours, we went through my personnel file with forensic detail. I had forgotten about some of the early projects I had worked on, the small innovations that had accumulated into something significant over time. There was the automated response system I had developed for handling routine client inquiries, which had freed up our senior consultants to focus on strategic work. The client satisfaction surveys that consistently rated my communication skills in the top 5% company-wide. The internal training program I had created to help other team members understand AI implementation challenges. "This is incredible," Rebecca said, looking through my published research. "Your paper on machine learning applications in financial services has been cited 47 times in academic journals. Your piece on AI ethics in healthcare consulting is being used as a case study at 3 different business schools." I had known about the citations, but seeing them compiled together like this was overwhelming. Each paper represented months of research and analysis, work I had done in addition to my regular responsibilities because I was genuinely passionate about pushing the field forward. "And look at this," Jonathan added, pulling up a spreadsheet on his laptop. "The revenue numbers on your client accounts. Meridian Industries alone has generated $2.3 million in consulting fees since you took over their relationship. Westfield Manufacturing is at $1.8 million. These aren't customer service accounts, Delilah. These are major strategic partnerships." The numbers were staggering when presented this way. I had always known my accounts were successful, but seeing the total revenue impact made me realize just how wrong my family's assessment of my work had been. I wasn't handling customer complaints. I was managing multi-million-dollar consulting relationships. Rebecca pulled out her phone and started making notes. "We need quotes from these clients for the press kit. Jonathan, can you reach out to Dr. Chen at Meridian? And we should definitely get something from Robert Kim at Westfield Manufacturing. He's been very vocal about the AI transformation they implemented." "Already on it," Jonathan said. "I sent requests this morning." Dr. Chen responded within an hour with a quote about how your strategic insights were instrumental in their digital transformation. She specifically mentioned your ability to translate complex technical concepts into actionable business strategies. I thought about my family sitting around the Christmas dinner table, discussing my customer service job and my comfort with support roles. If they could see this conversation, if they could understand the scope of what I had actually been building over the past 18 months, would they finally recognize the person I had become? "There's something else," Rebecca said, pulling out a final folder. "I did some research on industry recognition programs, and it turns out you've been nominated for several awards that you might not even know about." She handed me a printed email. "The Association of AI Professionals nominated you for their Rising Star Award based on your published research. The judging doesn't happen until February, but the nomination itself is significant. It means your peers in the industry recognize your contributions." Another email, "Tech Vision Weekly has been tracking your work for their annual 30 Under 30 in Technology Consulting list. They reached out to Jonathan last month for background information." I stared at the documents, feeling a strange mixture of pride and disbelief. While my family had been viewing my career as a series of small disappointments, the broader technology industry had been recognizing my work as innovative and influential. "This is why the timing is perfect," Jonathan said. "We're not just announcing a promotion. We're introducing someone who's already been making waves in the industry. The board appointment is simply the formal recognition of what you've already achieved." Rebecca nodded enthusiastically. "And that's the story that will resonate with journalists. It's not just about corporate advancement. It's about innovation being rewarded, about talent being recognized regardless of traditional career paths." We spent the rest of the day crafting the narrative that would be presented at the January 2nd event. Rebecca worked on press materials while Jonathan and I refined the presentation that would introduce me to the audience. By the time we finished, we had created something that felt less like a corporate announcement and more like a celebration of everything I had accomplished. That evening, I called Zara to update her on the day's developments. "Wait," she said. "You've been nominated for industry awards? Your research is being used at business schools? Girl, you've been holding out on me." "I guess I never thought to mention it," I said. It felt like normal work stuff. Normal work stuff? Delilah, most people spend their entire careers hoping to achieve half of what you've done in 18 months. Your family is going to lose their minds when they realize what you've actually been doing. She was right, and the thought was both thrilling and terrifying. In 5 days, my parents would walk into the grand ballroom expecting to see their daughter's modest workplace celebration. Instead, they would find themselves at an industry event celebrating one of the rising stars in AI consulting. The gap between their expectations and reality was about to become impossible to ignore. December 30th arrived with the kind of crisp winter clarity that made everything feel sharper and more significant. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror at 6:30 a.m., adjusting the navy blue blazer I had chosen for the board meeting that would officially change my life. In 3 hours, I would walk into the Pinnacle Dynamics boardroom as a client relations specialist. I would walk out as the youngest board member in the company's history. My phone buzzed with a text from Natasha. "Looking forward to your work party tomorrow. Should be fun to see what you do all day. Smile." The casual condescension in that message. The assumption that my work was simple enough to be understood in a single evening. The emoji that somehow made it worse. Crystallized exactly why this moment mattered so much. Tomorrow night, Natasha would finally understand what I did all day, and the revelation was going to reshape everything she thought she knew about me. I arrived at the Pinnacle Dynamics building 45 minutes early, using the extra time to walk through the executive floors and remind myself that I belonged here. The 34th floor, where the boardroom was located, still felt surreal to me. 6 months ago, I had only been up here twice, both times to deliver presentations to potential clients. Now I was about to take my seat at the mahogany conference table as an equal to the executives who had been running this company since before I graduated college. Pas le vieil. Jonathan was already in his office when I arrived, reviewing the agenda one final time. "Ready for this?" he asked, looking up from his papers with a smile that managed to be both encouraging and slightly mischievous. "I think so," I said, though my heart was beating fast enough that I wondered if he could hear it. "Any last-minute changes I should know about?" "Just one thing," he said, pulling out a leather portfolio I had never seen before. "The board asked me to prepare this for you. Consider it your official welcome package." Inside the portfolio was a contract outlining my board compensation, a number that made me blink twice to make sure I was reading it correctly. Below that was a letter of appointment signed by all 6 existing board members. And beneath that was something that made my breath catch. A business card with my name and the title, Board Member, Strategic Innovation. "Strategic innovation?" I asked. "That was the board's idea," Jonathan explained. "They wanted your role to reflect your specific expertise. You're not just a board member. You're the board member responsible for ensuring we stay ahead of technological and strategic trends." I stared at the business card, running my finger over the raised lettering of my name. Delilah Reeves, Board Member, Strategic Innovation. It felt like holding evidence of a completely different life, one where my contributions were not only recognized but actively sought out. "The meeting starts in 15 minutes, Jonathan said. "Are you ready to make history?" The boardroom was exactly as intimidating as I had expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, original artwork on the walls, and a conference table that probably cost more than my annual salary. The 6 existing board members were already seated when Jonathan and I walked in, and I felt a moment of imposter syndrome so intense it was almost physical. Then I remembered the portfolio Rebecca had compiled, the client testimonials, the published research, the revenue numbers. I wasn't an imposter. I was exactly where I belonged. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jonathan said, taking his seat at the head of the table, "I'd like to formally introduce Delilah Reeves, who will be joining us as our newest board member with a focus on strategic innovation." The next hour was a whirlwind of introductions, procedural votes, and strategic discussions that felt both foreign and familiar. I found myself contributing to conversations about market positioning and competitive analysis, with the same confidence I brought to client meetings. and gradually the surreal feeling faded into something that felt surprisingly natural. "Delilah," said Patricia Hernandez, the board chair and former CEO of 3 different tech companies, "Jonathan has shared some of your research on AI ethics in consulting. I'm particularly interested in your perspective on how we can differentiate ourselves in that space." For the next 20 minutes, I found myself leading a discussion about Pinnacle Dynamics' future positioning in the AI consulting market. I talked about the regulatory trends I had been tracking, the client concerns I had been hearing, and the opportunities I saw for companies that could demonstrate both technical expertise and ethical leadership. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Patricia smiled. "That," she said, "is exactly why you're here." The formal vote to confirm my appointment was unanimous. As each board member said yes to my nomination, I felt something shift inside me. Not just pride or satisfaction, but a fundamental recognition that I had finally found the place where my skills and ambitions aligned. After the meeting, Jonathan walked me to the elevator. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Different," I said, and realized that was exactly the right word. I felt different, not just because of the title or the compensation, but because I had finally been seen for who I actually was instead of who people assumed I might be. "The real test comes tomorrow night," Jonathan said as the elevator doors opened. "Are you prepared for your family's reaction?" I thought about Natasha's text message, about Trevor's comment, about leadership, about my parents' careful praise for my customer service work. I think they're the ones who need to prepare. That afternoon, I drove to the Riverside Grand Hotel to do a final walkthrough of the venue. The grand ballroom had been transformed into exactly what Rebecca and I had envisioned: elegant but not ostentatious, professional but warm. Round tables for 8 were arranged throughout the space, with a small stage at the front where Jonathan would make the announcement. The lighting was perfect for photographs, and the catering staff was already setting up stations for the cocktail reception. "Ms. Reeves," the event coordinator approached me with a clipboard, "we've finalized the guest list at 187 people. The photographer will be here at 5:30 tomorrow to capture arrival shots, and the TechVision Weekly reporter confirmed she'll be here by 6:15. 187 people. Industry executives, clients, journalists, colleagues, and scattered among them, my family members who had no idea they were about to witness one of the most significant moments of my career. I spent the evening preparing my remarks for the next day. Jonathan would introduce me and announce my board appointment, but I would have 5 minutes to speak about my vision for Pinnacle Dynamics' future. I wanted those 5 minutes to be perfect, not just for the audience, but for my parents and Natasha, who would finally understand what I had been building all along. My phone rang around 10 p.m. It was my mother. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. "I just wanted to confirm tomorrow's details. 6 o'clock at the Riverside Grand?" "That's right, Mom. Thank you for coming. It means a lot." "Of course, dear. We're excited to meet your coworkers and see more of what you do." Natasha was saying how nice it is that your company includes families in their celebrations. I closed my eyes, thinking about how different tomorrow's conversation would be. "Yes," I said. "It should be quite memorable." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment looking out at the city lights, knowing that this was the last night my family would see me as the underachieving daughter who had somehow fallen short of her potential. Tomorrow, everything would change. FOMO. The action had been taken. The plans were in motion. Now all that remained was the moment of truth. January 2nd dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that made the warm lights of the Riverside Grand Hotel look even more inviting as guests began arriving for what they believed would be a simple company celebration. I had been at the venue since 4 p.m., ostensibly helping with final preparations, but really just trying to manage my nervous energy by staying busy. Rebecca was there with her camera crew, Jonathan was reviewing his remarks one last time, and I was watching the parking lot fill up with luxury vehicles that belonged to some of the most influential people in the regional tech industry. At 5:45, I spotted my family's cars pulling into the circular driveway. Dad's silver Lexus, followed by Natasha and Trevor's black BMW, both vehicles looking perfectly appropriate for the upscale venue, but somehow emphasizing the gap between my family's understanding of the evening and its actual significance. I watched from the second-floor mezzanine as they entered the lobby, and the contrast between their expectations and reality was immediately visible. Dad was wearing the same navy blazer he wore to church functions, perfectly respectable but clearly not prepared for an event where the governor's chief technology officer would be mingling with Fortune 500 executives. Mom had on a nice dress, but her body language suggested she was already feeling underdressed compared to the other guests streaming through the entrance. Natasha, however, looked completely confident in her designer cocktail dress and statement jewelry. She was scanning the crowd with the kind of professional interest she brought to Morrison & Associates networking events, probably assessing the guest list, and wondering how her sister had managed to invite such an impressive group of people to what she assumed was a routine company party. "Your family's here," Rebecca said, appearing beside me with a knowing smile. "Are you ready for this?" I took a deep breath and headed downstairs to greet them. The lobby of the Riverside Grand was buzzing with conversation as guests checked in and received their name tags. I had specifically requested that my family's tags not include any special designation. I wanted them to discover my new role the same way everyone else would when Jonathan made the official announcement. "Delilah," Mom called out when she saw me approaching, her voice carrying a note of impressed surprise. "This is quite a venue for a work party, much fancier than we expected." Dad was looking around with barely concealed amazement. "I had no idea your company did events like this. Must be doing well financially." The irony of his comment wasn't lost on me. Pinnacle Dynamics was indeed doing well financially, in large part because of the client relationships and strategic initiatives I had been developing. But explaining that would have required revealing exactly what my job actually entailed, and I wasn't ready to spoil the surprise. "Where is everyone?" Natasha asked, clearly trying to spot my coworkers among the crowd of executives and entrepreneurs. "I don't see anyone who looks like customer service representatives." Trevor was studying the guest list that had been printed on elegant cardstock and displayed near the registration table. "These names," he said slowly, "I recognize some of these companies: Meridian Industries, Westfield Manufacturing, Digital Horizon Group. These are major players. Maybe they're clients," Mom suggested helpfully. "It's nice that your company invites clients to employee appreciation events." I watched my family trying to make sense of what they were seeing, fitting the evidence of an obviously high-level business gathering into their preconceived notions about my modest customer service job. The cognitive dissonance was almost physically visible. They could see that this was clearly an important industry event, but they couldn't reconcile that observation with their understanding of my role in it. "Delilah Reeves?" A voice behind me made me turn around. It was Dr. Sarah Chen from Meridian Industries, approaching with a warm smile and an elegantly dressed man I didn't immediately recognize. "Dr. Chen, thank you so much for coming," I said, genuinely pleased to see her. "I wouldn't miss it," she replied. "I was just telling Richard here about the incredible work you did on our AI implementation. Richard Kim, meet Delilah Reeves. Richard is the CEO of Pacific Tech Solutions." I felt my family's attention sharpen as Dr. Chen continued. "Delilah completely transformed our approach to machine learning applications. Her strategic insights saved us at least $2 million in implementation costs, and the efficiency gains have been remarkable." $2 million? Dad repeated, clearly confused. Dr. Chen turned to look at my family with polite interest. "Oh, are you colleagues of Delilah's?" "Family," Natasha said, her voice strangely tight. "We're her family." "How wonderful," Dr. Chen beamed. "You must be so proud. Delilah is absolutely brilliant. One of the most insightful AI strategists I've worked with. The consulting work she did for us was revolutionary." There was a moment of stunned silence from my family as they processed what Dr. Chen had just said. Consulting work. AI strategies. $2 million in savings. These were not words typically associated with customer service representatives. "I'm sorry," Trevor said carefully, "but I think there might be some confusion. Delilah works in customer service." Dr. Chen looked genuinely puzzled. "Customer service?" "No, Delilah is a senior strategic consultant. She's been leading our digital transformation initiative for the past 8 months. Some of the most sophisticated AI implementation work I've ever seen." The expression on Natasha's face was something I had never seen before. A mixture of confusion, disbelief, and the dawning realization that something fundamental about her understanding of the world was wrong. "But you said you do customer service," Mom said to me, her voice small and uncertain. "I handle client relations," I said carefully. "Technically true, but woefully incomplete. Dr. Chen has been one of my clients." "Client relations," Richard Kim interjected with a laugh, "is a modest way to describe what Delilah does. She's been instrumental in reshaping how Pacific Tech thinks about AI integration. We've been trying to poach her from Pinnacle Dynamics for months." Dad was staring at me like he was seeing a stranger. "You never mentioned any of this." "We should probably find our seats," I said, wanting to delay this conversation until after the official announcement. "The presentation starts in a few minutes." As we made our way into the grand ballroom, I could hear my family whispering among themselves behind me. Words like consulting and strategic and AI implementation were being repeated with increasing urgency, as if they were trying to decode a foreign language. The ballroom looked even more impressive with all the guests seated. Round tables filled with tech industry leaders, business journalists with their notebooks ready, and scattered throughout, my family members who were beginning to realize they had severely underestimated both the event and their daughter's role in it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jonathan's voice came through the sound system as he took the stage. "Thank you for joining us this evening to celebrate some exciting developments at Pinnacle Dynamics." I could see my family at their table, leaning forward with expressions of growing bewilderment. Natasha was looking around the room as if she expected hidden cameras to reveal that this was all an elaborate prank. "This past year has been remarkable for our company," Jonathan continued, "largely due to the innovative thinking and strategic leadership of some extraordinary team members. Tonight I'm excited to share some news that represents not just recognition of past achievements, but our commitment to continued innovation in the AI consulting space." Mom reached over and grabbed Dad's hand, a gesture that suggested she was beginning to understand that whatever was about to happen was bigger than she had prepared for. "It gives me great pleasure," Jonathan said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom, "to announce the newest member of Pinnacle Dynamics' board of directors." The room held its breath, and at their table my family froze completely. "Please join me in congratulating Delilah Reeves, our new board member for strategic innovation." The applause that erupted following Jonathan's announcement was thunderous, but from where I stood near the stage, I could see my family's table in perfect detail. The sound seemed to hit them in slow motion. First confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked almost like physical shock as the words "Board of Directors" and Delilah Reeves connected in their minds. Dad's mouth was actually hanging open. Mom had both hands pressed to her chest like she was having trouble breathing. But it was Natasha's reaction that I found most fascinating. She wasn't just surprised, she looked almost angry, as if my success was somehow a personal betrayal. I walked to the podium as the applause continued, and when I looked out at the audience of 187 people, I saw a room full of faces that reflected exactly what I had hoped to achieve. Industry leaders were smiling with genuine pleasure, clients were nodding with approval, and journalists were already taking notes. This wasn't just polite corporate applause, this was recognition from people who understood exactly what this appointment meant. "Thank you," I said as the room quieted, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. 18 months ago, I walked into Pinnacle Dynamics as a client relations specialist, excited about the opportunity to work with cutting-edge AI technology, but uncertain about where that path might lead. I could see Trevor leaning over to whisper something urgently to Natasha, probably trying to process how his sister-in-law had gone from customer service to board member without anyone in the family noticing. "What I discovered," I continued, "was that the most rewarding work happens at the intersection of technical innovation and human understanding. The projects I've had the privilege to work on, implementing AI systems that transform how companies operate, developing ethical frameworks for machine learning applications, building relationships with clients who are reimagining their entire industries. This work has shown me that the future of consulting isn't just about having the right answers. It's about asking the right questions." Dr. Chen was nodding enthusiastically from her table, and I could see other clients throughout the room who were clearly familiar with the projects I was referencing. But my family looked like they were listening to someone speak a foreign language. "The AI ethics framework we developed for healthcare applications," I said. has now been adopted by 12 major hospital systems across the region. The machine learning protocols we created for financial services have become the industry standard for 3 of the largest banks in the state. And the digital transformation strategies we've implemented have saved our clients a combined total of over $15 million in operational costs. The room buzzed with impressed murmurs, but at my family's table, Natasha looked like she was going to be sick. $15 million. Industry standards. Healthcare applications. These weren't the accomplishments of someone working in, quote, customer service. But perhaps most importantly, I continued, building toward the revelation I had been waiting 18 months to share, this work has been featured in academic journals, cited in policy papers, and recognized by the Association of AI Professionals with a nomination for their Rising Star Award. That piece of information hit my family like a physical blow. Mom actually gasped audibly, and Dad was staring at me like he was trying to figure out if I was actually his daughter or some elaborate imposter. As I finished my remarks and the applause began again, I could see Rebecca near the back of the room, nodding with satisfaction. Everything we had planned was working perfectly. The press coverage would be extensive, the industry recognition was already building, and most satisfyingly, my family was finally understanding who I actually was. But as I left the stage and began accepting congratulations from the crowd, I realized that the revelation was far from over. The formal announcement was just the beginning. Now came the part where my family would have to confront not just what I had achieved, but how completely they had misunderstood my life for the past year and a half. I was intercepted by Patricia Hernandez before I could make it back to my family's table. "Delilah," she said warmly, "that was beautifully done. I wanted you to meet someone." She gestured to a distinguished older man standing beside her. "This is Governor Morrison's technology advisor, James Fletcher. He's been following your work on AI ethics." "Ms. Reeves," James said, extending his hand, "congratulations on the appointment. Your research on algorithmic bias in government applications has been instrumental in shaping our new technology policies." I shook his hand, acutely aware that my family was probably watching this interaction and trying to process the fact that state government officials knew my work. "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. I'm honored that our research has been useful." "Useful is an understatement," he replied. "The framework you developed is being considered as a model for federal regulations. We'll definitely want to continue consulting with you as these policies evolve." After he moved on, I finally made my way to my family's table, where 4 very different versions of shock were playing out. Dad stood up immediately, pulling me into a hug that felt desperate and confused. "Delilah," he said, his voice strained, "I don't understand. How did this happen? How did we not know?" Mom was crying, though I couldn't tell if the tears were from pride, confusion, or something else entirely. "Sweetheart, all this time we thought, when you said customer service." "I handle client relations," I said gently. "I just didn't mention that my clients are Fortune 500 CEOs, and that my job involves developing AI strategies that reshape entire industries." Natasha was the last to speak, and when she did, her voice was barely controlled. "You let us think you were struggling. You let us believe you were in some dead-end job while you were doing all this." The accusation in her tone surprised me. "I never said I was struggling." "You assumed that." "Because you live in that tiny apartment and drive that old car and shop at discount stores," she shot back, her voice rising enough that people at nearby tables were starting to notice. "You presented yourself as someone who needed our pity." Trevor put a hand on her arm, clearly trying to calm her down, but Natasha shook him off. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? How foolish we all look." "This isn't about you, Natasha," I said quietly. "Isn't it? For months, I've been treating you like the family charity case, making excuses for your career, trying to help you network, assuming you needed my advice about everything from job interviews to financial planning. And the whole time, you were earning what, 6 figures? More than 6 figures? The question hung in the air, and I realized that this was part of what was so upsetting to her. It wasn't just that she had been wrong about my success. It was that my success might actually exceed her own. The board position comes with significant compensation, I said carefully, but that was never the point. Never the point? Natasha's laugh was sharp and bitter. Easy to say when you're probably making more than Trevor and me combined. Dad looked stricken. Delilah, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us go on thinking? Because you never asked, I said, the words coming out harder than I intended. You decided what my job was based on 2 words, customer service, and you never showed any interest in learning more. When I tried to explain my projects, you smiled politely and changed the subject. When I mentioned my research, you assumed it was some kind of hobby. Mom wiped her eyes with her napkin. But the way you lived, the apartment, the car. I like my apartment, I like my car. I don't need to display my success through material possessions. I looked around the table at their faces, seeing a mixture of hurt, confusion, and in Natasha's case, something that looked almost like betrayal. The question is why you needed me to be unsuccessful. Why it was easier to believe I was struggling than to consider that I might be building something significant. The conversation was interrupted by Rebecca approaching with a woman I recognized as the journalist from Tech Vision Weekly. Delilah, sorry to interrupt, but Linda wants to get a quick interview while the event is still going on. I looked back at my family, seeing that we were nowhere near finished with this conversation. We should talk more about this, I said to them, but not here. As I walked away with Rebecca and the journalist, I heard Natasha's voice behind me. Unbelievable. She's giving interviews now. The revelation was complete, but the real reckoning was just beginning. The interview with Tech Vision Weekly lasted 20 minutes, during which I was acutely aware of my family watching from their table across the ballroom. Linda Morrison, the journalist, asked probing questions about my rise through Pinnacle Dynamics, the innovative projects I had led, and my vision for the future of AI consulting. Each answer I gave seemed to widen the gap between who my family thought I was and who I actually had become. The most interesting aspect of your story, Linda said as her photographer captured shots of me with various industry leaders, is how you've redefined what career advancement looks like in tech consulting. Most board appointments go to people with traditional MBA backgrounds or decades of corporate experience. You've essentially created your own path. I think the industry is evolving, I replied, conscious that my words would appear in one of the most widely read technology publications in the region. Success isn't just about following predetermined career tracks anymore. It's about adding value, driving innovation, and building relationships that create meaningful outcomes for clients. When the interview concluded, I found myself dreading the conversation I knew was waiting for me. My family had remained at their table throughout the networking portion of the evening, clearly out of their element among the tech executives and entrepreneurs who were still circulating through the ballroom. I could see them huddled together, engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion. As I approached, their conversation stopped abruptly. The silence that followed felt charged with 18 months of misunderstanding and, if I was being honest, years of accumulated family dynamics that had never been properly addressed. Well, Dad said, his voice strained with the effort of appearing normal, that was quite an interview. You seemed very comfortable talking to the press. It's part of the job, I said, taking my seat. Industry publications cover board appointments, especially when they involve someone my age. Someone your age, Natasha repeated, her tone sharp. Do you realize how this makes the rest of us look? I've been practicing law for 6 years, building my career step by step, and my little sister is giving interviews about being the youngest board member in company history. Trevor shifted uncomfortably beside her. Natasha, maybe we should focus on celebrating Delilah's success instead of what? She snapped. Instead of acknowledging that she's been lying to us for months? I never lied, I said firmly. I answered the questions you asked, but you never asked the right questions. The right questions? Mom's voice was small and hurt. Sweetheart, when we asked about your job, we were trying to show interest in your life. No, I said, surprised by the certainty in my own voice. You were trying to confirm what you already believed about my life. When I mentioned AI projects, you smiled and nodded like I was talking about a hobby. When I said I was working with Fortune 500 companies, you assumed I meant I was taking their customer service calls. Dad leaned forward, clearly struggling to reconcile the daughter he thought he knew with the person who had just been celebrated by 200 industry leaders. But you never corrected us. You never said we were wrong. Would you have believed me? I asked. 6 months ago, if I had told you I was earning a 6-figure salary developing AI strategies for major corporations, would you have taken that seriously? Or would you have assumed I was exaggerating? The question hung in the air because we all knew the answer. They would have assumed I was inflating my importance, trying to make my job sound more significant than it actually was. That's not fair, Natasha said, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? At Christmas dinner, you explained to everyone why I was naturally suited for support roles. You told them I wasn't the type to seek leadership positions. Those weren't observations about my actual capabilities. They were assumptions based on your need to see me as less successful than you are. The words hit their target with surgical precision. Natasha's face flushed, and I could see Trevor looking between us with growing discomfort. That's not what I meant, Natasha protested, but her voice was shaky. I was just trying to explain why you were happy in your position. I wasn't happy in a customer service position, I said. I was excelling in a strategic consulting role that you couldn't recognize because it didn't match your understanding of what success looks like. Mom reached across the table to touch my hand. Delilah, please. We're proud of you. We're just trying to understand how we got everything so wrong. I looked at her kind, confused face and felt my anger soften slightly. You got it wrong because you needed to get it wrong. For some reason, it was important for this family's dynamics that I be the one who was struggling, the one who needed help, the one who hadn't quite figured out how to succeed. That's ridiculous, Dad said, but his protest lacked force. Is it? Think about family gatherings for the past year. Who gets praised for their achievements? Who gets asked for advice? Who gets treated like their opinions matter? And who gets patted on the head and told they're trying their best? The silence that followed was deafening. Around us, the reception was winding down. Guests were saying their goodbyes, and industry leaders were exchanging business cards and planning follow-up meetings. But at our table, 18 months of carefully maintained misunderstandings were finally being exposed. You could have told us, Natasha said finally, her voice smaller than before. You could have explained what you were really doing. I tried, I said. Remember when I mentioned my research being published? You said that was nice, and immediately changed the subject to Trevor's real estate projects. Remember when I told you about the AI implementation I was working on? You said it sounded technical, and asked if I was getting overtime pay. Trevor winced. I remember that conversation. I just assumed. You seem so modest about everything. I was being professional, I corrected. I was bound by confidentiality agreements. I couldn't share client details or strategic information. But I could have shared more about the scope of what I was doing if anyone had shown genuine interest. We showed interest, Mom said defensively. You showed polite interest, I replied. The kind of interest you show when someone's describing a hobby you don't understand. You never asked follow-up questions. You never wanted to know more. You accepted the simplest possible explanation for everything, because it fit the role you needed me to play in this family. Patricia Hernandez appeared beside our table, interrupting the tense conversation. Delilah, wonderful event tonight. I wanted to introduce you to someone before they leave. She gestured to a woman in an elegant suit. This is Amanda Rodriguez from Goldman Sachs. They're looking for board advisors on their new AI initiative. I stood up to shake Amanda's hand, acutely aware that my family was watching this interaction with expressions of continued bewilderment. Ms. Reeves, Amanda said, Patricia's told me about your work on algorithmic bias prevention. We're implementing AI systems in our trading operations, and we need someone with your expertise to help ensure we're doing it responsibly. I'd be very interested in discussing that, I replied professionally. Please have your team reach out to schedule a meeting. After she left, I sat back down to find my family staring at me in what could only be described as awe. Goldman Sachs, Dad said slowly. They want to hire you as an advisor. It appears so, I said. Jesus Christ, Delilah, Natasha whispered. What else don't we know about your life? It was, I realized, exactly the right question. Finally, the days following the reception unfolded like a masterclass in how quickly life can change when the truth finally comes to light. By January 5th, The TechVision Weekly article had been published with the headline, "From Client Relations to Boardroom. Delilah Reeves redefines success in AI consulting." And by January 8th, my phone was ringing almost constantly with interview requests, speaking opportunities, and consulting offers. The article itself was everything Rebecca and I had hoped for, a detailed profile that positioned me as a rising star in the tech industry while highlighting Pinnacle Dynamics' innovative approach to talent development. But the real satisfaction came from the responses the article generated, particularly from people who knew my family. My cousin Bradley called on Tuesday morning, his voice filled with genuine amazement. "Delilah, I just saw the TechVision article. Holy shit. Sorry, this is incredible. I had no idea you were doing work at this level." "Thanks, Bradley," I said, checking my email while we talked. I had 17 new messages since the previous evening, including requests from 3 different universities asking me to speak at their business schools. "I have to ask," Bradley continued, "what was Christmas dinner like after this? Because I remember Natasha going on about your customer service job, and now I'm reading about you being nominated for industry awards." I paused in my email review. The question of how my family was handling the aftermath had been on my mind constantly, though I hadn't spoken to any of them since the reception. It's been complicated. What I didn't tell Bradley was that my parents had called twice, and Natasha had called once, but I hadn't been ready to have those conversations yet. I needed time to process what had happened at the reception, and more importantly, I needed to see how they would handle the public recognition of my success. The answer came on Wednesday, when I received a text from my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who had known my family for decades. "Dear, I saw the article about you in the paper. How wonderful. I ran into your mother at the grocery store yesterday, and she was practically glowing with pride, telling everyone about your big promotion. She said she always knew you were destined for great things." I stared at the message for a long time. My mother, who just 5 days earlier had been struggling to understand how her customer service daughter had become a board member, was now claiming she had always known about my potential. The revisionist history was almost breathtaking in its audacity. The pattern continued throughout the week. Dad posted about my promotion on his LinkedIn, describing himself as a, quote, "proud father," whose daughter was changing the game in AI consulting. Natasha shared the TechVision article on her Facebook page with a caption that read, "So proud of my brilliant sister, #family, #success, #I." None of these posts mention the months of condescending comments, the Christmas dinner dismissals, or the fundamental misunderstanding of what I actually did for a living. Instead, they presented a narrative where my family had been supportive all along, where my success was a source of family pride rather than family embarrassment. The consequences for their previous behavior were swift and unmistakable. Trevor called me on Thursday evening, his voice carefully controlled but clearly strained. "Delilah, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. I wanted to apologize for what happened at the reception, and also to discuss something that's come up at work." "What's come up?" I asked, though I had a feeling I knew where this was heading. "Well, the article mentioned your work with financial services companies, and some of my colleagues at the real estate firm have been asking about AI applications for property management and market analysis. They're wondering if you might be available for consulting work." There it was, Trevor, who had explained to me just 2 weeks earlier that not everyone can be in charge, was now asking for my professional services. "That's interesting," I said neutrally. "What kind of timeline are they looking at?" "As soon as possible, honestly. The managing partner read about your efficiency improvements at Meridian Industries, and he's very interested in exploring similar applications for our portfolio management systems." I let the silence stretch for a moment. "Trevor, do you remember what you said at Christmas dinner about leadership and followers?" Another pause. "Delilah, I want to apologize for that. I clearly didn't understand the scope of what you were doing." "You didn't understand because you didn't want to understand," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "You were comfortable with your assumptions because they supported a particular view of family hierarchy that worked for you and Natasha." That's probably fair," he admitted. "Look, I know we handled everything badly. Is there any way we can move forward from this?" The question hung between us, And I realized that this was the moment I had been waiting for. Not just the recognition of my success, but the acknowledgement that my family's treatment of me had been fundamentally wrong. "Trevor, I'm willing to consider your firm as a potential client," I said finally. "But it would be handled through Pinnacle Dynamics' standard consulting process. Proposals, contracts, market rate fees. No family discounts, no informal arrangements." "Of course," he said quickly. "Absolutely. I'll have them reach out through proper channels." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about how dramatically the power dynamics had shifted. 2 weeks ago, Trevor had been patronizing me about career limitations. Now he was asking me to solve his company's strategic technology challenges. My phone buzzed with a text from Zara. "Saw your parents' LinkedIn posts. The audacity is incredible. Are you okay with how they're spinning this?" I typed back, "It's exactly what I expected. They can't admit they were wrong, so they're rewriting history." "What about Natasha? How's she handling all this?" That was the most interesting question. Natasha hadn't called or texted directly, but I had heard through Bradley that she was struggling more than our parents with the new reality. Apparently, she had made several comments about feeling blindsided and had suggested that I had been deliberately deceptive about my career progress. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Jonathan's name appeared on the screen. "Delilah, I hope you're managing all this attention okay. The response to the announcement has been incredible." "It's been overwhelming but good," I said. "How are things on your end?" "Fantastic. We've had 12 new consulting inquiries since the article came out, including 3 Fortune 500 companies specifically asking to work with you. The board is thrilled with the PR impact." "That's wonderful news." "There's something else," Jonathan continued. "Patricia got a call from the Goldman Sachs team. They want to fast-track the advisory position discussion. Apparently, Amanda Rodriguez was very impressed with your background." I leaned back in my chair, thinking about how my family would react to this latest development. "What kind of timeline are they looking at?" "They want to meet next week." "Delilah, this could be huge for your career and for Pinnacle Dynamics. Goldman Sachs as a client opens doors we've never been able to access." As we discussed the logistics, I realized that the reception had been just the beginning. The recognition, the opportunities, the complete reversal of how people saw my capabilities. All of it was accelerating beyond what I had ever imagined possible. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was the simplest one. My family could no longer pretend they didn't know who I was. They might rewrite history on social media, they might claim they had always been supportive, but they could never again dismiss my work as unimportant or assume I was content with a supporting role. The truth was finally public, and it was changing everything. The conversation I had been avoiding finally happened on January 15th, when my parents showed up unannounced at my apartment building. I was returning from a Goldman Sachs strategy meeting when I found them waiting in the lobby, looking older and more uncertain than I had ever seen them. "Delilah," Mom said as I approached, her voice carrying a tremor of nervousness. "We need to talk, please." I looked at them standing there, Dad in his weekend khakis, and Mom clutching her purse like a shield, and realized that this moment had been inevitable from the day I decided to accelerate the board announcement. "You should have called first," I said, but I gestured toward the elevator anyway. My one-bedroom apartment, which had always felt perfectly adequate to me, seemed to shrink with their presence. They sat stiffly on my couch while I made coffee, the silence heavy with unspoken accusations and justifications that neither side was quite ready to voice. "How long have you been planning this?" Dad asked finally, accepting his coffee cup with hands that shook slightly. "The board position, the publicity, all of it." "Planning what, exactly?" I sat across from them in my reading chair, maintaining physical distance that felt necessary for emotional clarity. "Don't play games with us, Delilah," Mom said, though her tone was more hurt than angry. "You orchestrated that entire evening. You invited us to watch you embarrass us, in front of hundreds of people." The accusation hung in the air between us, and I found myself marveling at how they had managed to make my professional success about their personal discomfort. "I invited you to witness my career achievement," I said carefully. "If you felt embarrassed, that was because of your own assumptions, not because of anything I did to you." "But you knew," Dad insisted. You knew we didn't understand what you were doing. And you let us keep thinking. Let you keep saying what? That I was in a dead-end job? That I wasn't leadership material? That I was naturally suited for support roles? I set down my coffee cup with more force than necessary. You're right. I did know you were wrong about all of that. The question is why you needed to be wrong. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We never needed you to fail, sweetheart. We love you. We're proud of you. Are you? I asked. Because for 18 months, you've acted like my career was something to be managed rather than celebrated. You've offered unsolicited advice about job searching, networking, and financial planning, all based on the assumption that I was struggling. When did you ever ask if I was happy with my work? When did you ever express curiosity about what I was actually accomplishing? The questions landed with the weight I intended. Mom wiped her eyes with a tissue while Dad stared at his hands. We thought we were being supportive, Dad said quietly. Encouraging. You thought you were managing family dynamics, I corrected. It was easier to have Natasha be the successful daughter, and me be the one who needed guidance. It gave everyone a role to play, a comfortable hierarchy that made sense to you. That's not fair, Mom protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Think about the last 5 family gatherings. How much time was spent discussing Natasha's achievements versus mine? How often were her opinions sought out versus mine? How frequently was she treated as an expert versus me being treated as someone who needed advice? The silence that followed was answer enough. The thing is, I continued, I don't think you did it maliciously. I think you did it unconsciously, because it served a function that none of us wanted to examine too closely. But the result was the same. I was consistently diminished. My accomplishments were minimized, and my potential was systematically underestimated. Dad leaned forward, his face showing genuine anguish. What do you want from us now? How do we fix this? It was the question I had been asking myself for 2 weeks, and I finally had an answer. You stop trying to manage me, I said. You stop offering unsolicited advice about my career, my finances, my life choices. You stop assuming you know what's best for me based on your limited understanding of my circumstances. But we're your parents, Mom said, as if that fact alone justified their previous behavior. Yes, and I'm an adult with advanced degrees, a successful career, and the demonstrated ability to make sound decisions about my own life. Being my parents doesn't give you the right to treat me like I'm perpetually failing to meet some standard you've never clearly articulated. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the city where I had built a career they never bothered to understand. Here's what's going to change, I said, not turning around. Family gatherings are no longer forums for discussing my career unless I bring it up. No more helpful suggestions about job searching or networking. No more assumptions about my financial situation or lifestyle choices. Delilah, Dad started. I'm not finished, I said, finally turning back to face them. Natasha needs to stop explaining my career to other people. She needs to stop positioning herself as more knowledgeable about professional success than I am. And both of you need to stop validating her assessment of my capabilities. Mom looked stricken. We never meant to make you feel diminished. But you did, I said simply. For months, you made me feel like I was disappointing you by not living up to some expectation of traditional success, while simultaneously dismissing the actual success I was building. That stops now. Dad set down his coffee cup and looked at me with something that might have been recognition. You're right, he said quietly. We've been treating you like you were still 22 and figuring things out, not like the accomplished professional you obviously are. I'm willing to rebuild our relationship, I said, but it has to be based on who I actually am, not who you think I should be. And it has to include respect for my autonomy and my judgment. What about family events, Mom asked. Holidays? Birthdays? I'll attend family events where I'm treated as an equal adult, not as someone who needs guidance or management. If conversations start drifting toward unsolicited advice or condescending explanations of my career, I'll leave. The boundary was clear, non-negotiable, and long overdue. Dad nodded slowly. We can do that. We want to do that. Good, I said. Because the alternative is that we maintain polite but distant contact, while I build relationships with people who see and appreciate who I actually am." They left an hour later, after a conversation that felt both exhausting and necessary. As I watched them walk to their car from my window, I realized that this was what breaking free actually looked like. Not cutting off family entirely, but refusing to accept relationships that required me to be smaller than I was. My phone buzzed with a text from Zara. "How did it go with the parents?" I typed back, "Hard but necessary. I think they finally understand that things have to change. And if they don't change?" I looked around my apartment, thinking about the Goldman Sachs meeting that morning, the speaking engagement requests piling up on my desk, the research projects that were generating interest from universities across the country. I had built a life that was fulfilling and successful on my own terms, and I wasn't going to sacrifice it for anyone's comfort, not even my family's. "Then I'll be fine without them," I replied, and meant it completely. 6 months later, I stood in the gleaming conference room of Goldman Sachs regional headquarters, presenting my quarterly report on their AI integration initiative to a room full of managing directors and senior partners. The project had exceeded every expectation. Efficiency gains of 34%, cost reductions of $12 million annually, and a framework that was being rolled out across their global operations. "The ethical oversight protocols we've implemented," I explained to the attentive audience, "have not only ensured compliance with emerging regulations, but have actually become a competitive advantage in client acquisition. 3 major pension funds have specifically cited our responsible AI practices as factors in their decision to increase their portfolios with Goldman Sachs." Amanda Rodriguez, who had become not just a client but a genuine mentor, nodded approvingly from the front row. After the presentation, she pulled me aside with news that would have seemed impossible just 12 months earlier. "Delilah, the executive committee has asked me to extend a formal offer for you to join Goldman Sachs as managing director of AI strategy. The role would be based here in Riverside, with a mandate to build out our regional technology consulting division." I felt the familiar surge of validation that came with being recognized for my actual capabilities. But this time it was tempered with something new, the calm confidence of someone who finally understood her own worth. "Amanda, I'm honored by the offer," I said. "But I'm very happy with my current role at Pinnacle Dynamics. Jonathan and the board have given me incredible autonomy to shape our AI practice, and we're building something really special there." Her smile told me this was exactly the response she had hoped for. "I figured you'd say that, which is why I have a counterproposal. What if we structure this as a strategic partnership? Goldman Sachs as Pinnacle Dynamics' preferred financial services client, with you leading all our AI initiatives while maintaining your board position." It was the kind of arrangement that would cement my reputation in the industry, while allowing me to continue building the consulting practice I had helped create. "I'd be very interested in exploring that," I said. That evening, I celebrated the partnership announcement at dinner with Zara, who had moved to Riverside 3 months earlier to take a senior engineering position at a startup I had recommended her for. We were at Meridian, the upscale restaurant in the Riverside Grand Hotel, where my professional transformation had first become public. "So let me get this straight," Zara said, raising her wine glass. "Goldman Sachs wanted to poach you so badly that they're restructuring their entire consulting relationship to keep working with you. You're basically too successful to steal." I laughed, thinking about how surreal this conversation would have seemed during that Christmas dinner 11 months ago. "It's been a good year." "Speaking of which," Zara said with the mischievous expression I knew meant she had been saving something important, "I saw Natasha's LinkedIn post yesterday. Apparently she's been telling people she always knew you were destined for greatness and that she encouraged your career in technology." I had seen the post too. It was part of an ongoing pattern where my family had gradually rewritten the history of my career success, transforming themselves from skeptical observers into supportive champions. "Let her have her narrative," I said. "The truth is documented in Tech Vision Weekly." "Have things gotten better with them?" I considered the question while watching the city lights twinkle beyond the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows. Different. Better in some ways. More honest in others. The truth was that my relationship with my family had stabilized into something I could manage. My parents had largely honored the boundaries I had set, though I could tell it required conscious effort. They no longer offered unsolicited career advice, and they had stopped treating family gatherings like performance reviews where my life choices were subject to committee approval. Natasha had been the most resistant to change, struggling to adjust to a dynamic where she wasn't the unchallenged family expert on professional success. But even she had eventually adapted, especially after her law firm lost a major client to a competitor who had implemented AI-driven contract analysis, technology that I had helped develop. The real transformation had been internal. I no longer needed their validation or approval to feel confident in my choices. I had built a career that satisfied me intellectually and financially, surrounded myself with colleagues who respected my contributions, and created a life that reflected my actual values rather than their expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. Board meeting moved to 10 a.m. tomorrow. Major announcement about the Pacific expansion. Pinnacle Dynamics was opening offices in Seattle and San Francisco, with me overseeing the AI consulting practice across all 3 locations. It would mean more travel, a larger team, and the kind of strategic responsibility that would have been unimaginable in my client relations days. Work? Zara asked, noticing my phone. New expansion plans. It looks like I'll be building AI consulting practices up and down the West Coast. Remember when you were worried about being taken seriously in boardroom meetings? I did remember. I remembered the imposter syndrome, the careful preparation for every client interaction, the constant second-guessing of my own expertise. All of that felt like it belonged to someone else, a younger, less confident version of myself who had internalized other people's limitations. The best part, I said, is that I finally understand what actually matters. Not proving them wrong, not getting revenge for their assumptions, but building something meaningful that uses my actual skills. We finished dinner as the restaurant began to empty, discussing Zara's startup projects and my plans for the Pacific expansion. As we walked through the lobby where my family had first encountered the reality of my professional life, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with vindication and everything to do with authenticity. Outside, Zara headed toward her car, while I decided to walk the few blocks to my apartment. The January air was crisp but not uncomfortable, and I wanted time to process the day's developments. My phone rang as I crossed the park where I used to jog during those early months at Pinnacle Dynamics, when I was still proving myself and wondering if I would ever be taken seriously. The caller ID showed Dr. Chen's name. Delilah, I hope I'm not calling too late. I wanted to congratulate you on the Goldman Sachs partnership announcement. It's well-deserved recognition for everything you've accomplished. Thank you, Dr. Chen. That means a lot coming from you. I also wanted to let you know that Meridian Industries has been asked to present our AI transformation as a case study at the National Technology Leadership Conference next month. We'd like you to co-present with us if you're available. I looked up at the stars barely visible above the city lights, thinking about the journey from client relations specialist to nationally recognized AI strategist. I'd be honored to participate. After we hung up, I continued walking toward home. Past the coffee shop where I used to grab breakfast before early client calls, past the bookstore where I had studied emerging AI regulations during lunch breaks, past the small details of a life I had built quietly and deliberately while my family remained convinced I was struggling. At my apartment building, I paused to check my mailbox and found a thick envelope from the Association of AI Professionals. Inside was a formal notification that I had won their Rising Star Award, along with an invitation to accept the honor at their annual conference in Chicago. I stood in my lobby, holding the award notification and thinking about the Christmas dinner that had started this entire transformation. My family's dismissive comments had been the catalyst, but the real change had come from my decision to stop accepting their diminished expectations as truth. The woman who had sat silently while her sister explained her career limitations was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own value and insisted that others recognize it too. The vindication was complete, but more importantly, the future was entirely my own to define. In a man, as I rode the elevator to my apartment, I was already planning the next chapter. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.